Hello everyone and welcome back to part 2 of the Blood Ring Arena. For those first-time visitors, the Blood Ring Arena is meant to be a way for Warhammer champions to test their faith in steel in a more personal 1v1 style format. The rules can be played for one-off challenges or tournaments, and we are currently in the midst of the first 100-point tournament to see who becomes king of this arena. The tournament began with 16 combatants, and now we are down to 8, who have all been paired off for the second set of today's matches. Be sure to check out part 1 if you want to know more about the tournament or rules. I have also provided resources in the description for this to be played in other formats of Warhammer, such as 8th edition, 6th, or even Mordheim. But I gotta say, so far, I think it plays really well with the old world rules we are currently using. The fighters and their opponents for this week are currently on screen, and the first match between Garen Eagle-Eye and Diana the Bastion should begin shortly. The crowds are beginning to gather outside, and this should be another day of packed stands in the arena. It's looking like the fans have found their seats, and it's going to be another packed day in the arena, and the fighters are approaching the ring. Get ready for part 2 of the Blood Ring Arena. The fighters take their positions, and while Diana prays to the Lady of the Lake, Garen advances quickly. Diana takes cover and prays again until at the tip of her finger, a divine light begins to brighten with the intensity and size of a fireball and blasts the witch hunter for massive damage. The first round is over quick, with the paladin victorious. It should be noted that Garen did have the foresight to take the Magic Resistance 2 Witch Hunter Creed, but it wasn't enough to stop the intensity of that spell. Both fighters reset and prepare for round 2. The Paladin again prays to the Lady of the Lake, and the Witch Hunter advances forward. Diana takes some cover and tries to conjure another fireball, but fails to do so. The Witch Hunter continues their advance, this time taking some pistol shots at the Paladin and landing a wound. Diana again tries to conjure another fireball, but her prayers go unanswered. The Witch Hunter sees this as his moment to strike and draws his two-handed sword, then charges the Paladin, striking over some spiked barricades and debris in between the two. He gets one wound through, but the Paladin's blessing of the Lady of the Lake keeps her safe. Paladin strikes back and also gets a wound in on the Witch Hunter, but he doesn't have any kind of ward save to keep him safe. So after he fails his armor save, that wound goes through, and the blow staggers the Witch Hunter back. The Paladin holds her ground, and during her turn, prays again for another fireball, and her prayers are answered. Another deadly fireball blasts the Witch Hunter, and after the smoke clears, the duel is over. Diana stands victorious. Garen the Witch Hunter sustained far too great damage from those fireballs and is added to the arena's body count. We move on to the second duel with the Bretonnian Hector Lefetch and the proud halfling Donald Stoutfoot. The fighters take their side, and again, we have another Bretonnian praying to the Lady of the Lake, meaning their opponent will automatically begin the duel the first turn. Donald takes position and shoots his crossbow. He hits the target, but somehow he fails to wound. Hector quickly advances forward, putting not much distance between him and his target. Donald, seeing not many options, decides to lunge forward and charge the Bretonnian. Both engage in what, I am not kidding, is 2 full turns of non-stop parrying. The halfling passing an impressive amount of armor saves during the 2 turns, but also flubbing almost every attack with non-stop 1s and 2s on his hit rolls or wound rolls. The paladin rolling an impressive amount of hits each time during these parrying blows back and forth, but he's often choking when it comes to rolling his wounds. It's not all parrying back and forth forever, though, because after 2 turns of no progress on either side, Hector Lefetch strikes with his sword and finally gets a wound through on the halfling. And shortly afterwards, his steed capitalizes on the momentum and stomps the halfling for the final wound. The first round goes to the Bretonnian, and shortly afterwards, the second round begins. Donald, enraged from the disrespect handed to him in the last duel, readies his crossbow and aims right for Hector. A critical hit that knocks the paladin from his saddle and quickly ends the second round. His steed manages to nudge Hector onto his back, and the two quickly retreat and recoup for the third round. Everything's all tied up, and after a bit of time, both fighters are ready. Donald begins things with his signature crossbow shot, but this time, Hector's armor holds strong. The paladin charges forward, this time giving a little more distance between himself and the halfling, but not enough to allow his opponent a stand-and-shoot reaction. The halfling sees a similar situation to last time, but convinces himself his swordsmanship will be much better this time around as he charges the Bretonnian. The paladin drops his lance and draws his sword, and readies himself for another melee with the halfling. Donald's charge and swordsmanship do seem to be a bit more on point this time, as he manages to get a wound in on the paladin. However, Hector is quicker to strike as well, and manages to also get a wound in on Donald. Both fighters stand their ground and go for another round of the melee. Both opponents strike valiantly, but unfortunately, Donald's swordsmanship proves to be no match for a Bretonnian paladin. And after a few more strikes back and forth, the halfling is defeated, and Hector Lefetch is declared the victor. After the duel, it does seem that this little lucky halfling general regained consciousness and will live to fight another day. The third duel between Scory Firebeard and Kurgi Bigtooth is about to begin. Both fighters take their sides, and as Scory begins readying his first shot on the ogre, 2 ill omens fall upon him. The first is he misses his shot. The second is that it seems the gods have cursed Scory. We'll have to see how this curse comes into effect later on. The ogre advances forward, shooting his pistols at the dwarf, but failing to hit. The second turn begins, and Scory gets an amazing shot on the ogre. One of the wounds was normal, but the other one was a 6, triggering the handgun's armor bane ability. The ogre fails both saves and is barely hanging in, when suddenly at the start of his turn, a blessing of the gods befalls him and heals one of his wounds. The ogre drinks his potion of toughness, then continues his steady advance, laying suppressive fire down with his pistols, but again failing to get any wounds through. Scory sacrifices shooting this turn and repositions with just enough distance to get a stand and shoot attack. The ogre charges, and Scory takes his shot, However, the god's curse comes into play and stops his hit from landing. It seems this dwarf's fate might be sealed. Both draw their melee weapons, and the ogre gets one wound through on the dwarf. And Scory is backed up into a corner. With every inch given, the ogre continues his relentless attack. Scory does manage to get one wound in on the ogre, but eventually his defenses fall, and Kurgi Bigtooth is declared the victor of the first round. If the gods hadn't blessed that ogre, though, and also cursed Scory, he would have taken that round. But alas, the gods work in mysterious ways, and both fighters must accept their fate and continue into the second round. Kurgi Bigtooth drinks his potion of toughness right away and advances forward, shooting his pistols but not getting any wounds through. The dwarf responds with taking some cover and failing to wound the ogre as well. Turn 2, the ogre tries to cut off the dwarf and get around his flank, and hopefully prevent any movement shenanigans. He also fails to get any damage through with his pistols, yet again. Scory abandons his cover, backing up just enough distance to get a stand-and-shoot attack on the ogre, and also take a wild shot that does manage to hit and get 2 wounds in on the ogre. The ogre still prepares himself for his charge and begins barreling towards the dwarf. Scory readies his gun for his stand-and-shoot attack, and blam! His gun's barrels let out a mighty shot that lands another wound on the ogre. Kurgi is knocked over, and Scory claims round 2. Everything is now all tied up, and after both fighters have recovered, we move on to round 3. Round 3 starts with Scory getting a nasty shot, dealing 2 wounds on Kurgi Bigtooth. The ogre begins his advance forward and drinks his potion of toughness. Scory readies another shot, but the ogre's defenses, combined with the effect of that potion of toughness, are too much for the bullets to have any kind of effect. When the ogre starts his next turn, the gods yet again bless him and heal a wound. It seems nothing is going to stop this ogre from claiming his victory against this dwarf. The ogre continues advancing, laying suppressive fire on the dwarf. Scory, knowing the ogre is about to charge him, decides to forego shooting this turn and sprints out of the ogre's charge arc. The ogre repositions and prepares to charge the dwarf on the following turn. While doing so, he shoots his pistols and gets a nasty shot in on the dwarf, dealing 1 wound. Scory continues to back up and takes a quick reaction shot while doing so, but fails to hit. This is the moment the ogre's been waiting for here. That annoying little dwarf is finally within his charge arc, and it's a short distance away. The ogre begins to charge towards Scory, when suddenly, a drunken wizard in the crowd carelessly lets a fireball get flung into the arena, and it hits the ogre for massive damage. The ogre falls to the ground, and a loud thud echoes across the arena. The fight is somehow over before Scory even had a chance to stand and shoot. It even seems the fireball proved to be fatal to the ogre. Scory is declared the winner, and we move on to the final duel. We have our Dwarf Slayer getting paired up against yet another caster. And on paper, it kind of seems like it's a one-sided fight. I think pretty much in favor of the Slayer here, since they have some built-in magic resistance for their profile. But pay attention throughout the fight. There's actually a good amount of opportunities, I think, for both fighters, honestly, to take the win. And it ends up being a pretty close one. The fight begins with Lady Adamara casting her signature spell, the magic missile, the Summoning. Yet, unfortunately, it fails to cast. Fungi sprints forward. And when we get to the elf's turn, two mistakes occur on her part. The first is she seemed to position herself poorly, as right in the crowd above her is a lot of angry dwarf spectators, and one particularly rowdy one throws a rock at the dark elf, dealing a wound. If I had to guess, this also threw her momentum off this turn, because her second mistake was failing to cast her spell. The dwarf spends one more turn advancing forward. The Dark Elf Sorceress, having nowhere else to run to, tries one more time to desperately cast her magic missile, but yet again fails the roll. Thungy Bladestorm charges in with the fury of his ancestors behind each strike, and he lands an impressive 3 wounds and 2 killing blows on the roll there. The elf, having no real defenses to speak of, is quickly defeated, and we move on to round 2. Round 2 is a bit of a strange one. To give the long story short, the dwarf spends the entire round sprinting and charging this elf, but somehow always rolling a 1 and 2 on his charge dice. Every single time. The elf fails to get a single magic missile wound to go through on this dwarf the entire battle, and spends most of her time fleeing and sprinting for her life. By the end of the duel, both fighters had almost sprinted around the entire arena. The timer eventually runs out, and neither fighter was wounded. The round is considered a draw. The dwarf, no joke, rolled 3 failed charges over the duel, and the sorceress had a total of 1 successful magic missile, but it failed to get any wounds through. I think she rolled like 3 on the to hit roll on the 2d6, maybe 4. And then she just spent the entire game repositioning herself, and the dwarf doing the same thing. It was really a battle of positioning that neither side came out on top. Round 3 begins, and quite surprisingly, this one's going to end rather quickly, with the dwarf sprinting across the bridge and finally getting blasted by a potent magic missile from the sorceress, dealing an impressive 5 wounds to the slayer. Round 3 goes to the Dark Elf Sorceress, and somehow, now things are all tied up, and we are going to the first tiebreaker. Round 4 starts with the dwarf sprinting to the bridge, and the elf failing to cast her magic missile. The second round, the dwarf corners the side the elf was on of the arena. She responds by shifting over to the other side of the arena, and unfortunately rolling a miscast on her spell. However, her Dark Elf special rule prevented her from taking any severe damage, like from a miscast or anything, but the magic missile still did fail to cast. The dwarf tries to charge the elf, but comes up short yet again. And while doing so, he gets a bottle from the stands thrown at him, no doubt from a dwarf hater. However, Thungy Bladestorm has got very quick reflexes and manages to dodge the incoming bottle. The Dark Elf repositions herself yet again and actually gets her spell to go off this turn, and it does an impressive 8 hits. But when rolling to wound, no damage is done to that impressive dwarven physique. Thungy Bladestorm, yet again with the fury of his ancestors behind him, charges the elf. She eventually decides to flee during this moment, but with his little stunty legs, he sprints as fast as he can, and he eventually catches the sorceress. Surprisingly, Thungy only gets 1 wound in on the elf, and she actually manages to go blow for blow with the Slayer, dealing 1 wound back. Both fighters stand their ground and go for another round in the melee. One more exchange is all it takes, though, as Thungy lands another savage blow upon the elf, knocking her to the arena floor, and Thungy is declared the victor of the duel. Afterwards, it does seem that Lady Adamara managed to recover from her wounds and will live to fight another day. The third matchups are going to be interesting now. With an entirely Bretonnian and dwarf cast, we'll have to see what faction can take the arena crown. Find out next time in the Blood Ring Arena.